Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments. And today we'll be continuing with the part of culture and disasters, and especially with the study of case of tsunami reconstruction in Tamil Nadu, southern India. In fact, I'm titling this as Understanding Post-Tsunami Response. So this is again a part of my study which I have conducted during 2006 to 2010, and again I visited this place again in 2014. So it's a kind of understanding how I actually made and how I have interpreted it. So in my previous lecture of the part 1 of this series, where we have discussed about an interdisciplinary framework, how to understand the culture, the role of culture in the post-disaster recovery process, and at the same time how it is in relation with its vulnerability situation. So for that I developed a component of the central component which talks about the built environment in layers, starting from the geological space to the building component, whereas how the structures of cultural that create cultural identity, how they influence the space, and then how we can measure these spaces, how we can actually qualify these spaces through the urban design principles of responsive environments, especially with the principles of and the qualitative indices of responsive environments have been discussed. But because being studied in a disaster context, I am looking at both the pre-disaster influences and the post-disaster impacts and how people responded to it, and applying with a situational analysis. So what I did was I traveled along with the east coast of Tamil Nadu. We call it as ECR Road, East Coast Road, and visited a number of villages, taken the statistics from the TNRC, the Tamil Nadu Resource Center, the Tsunami Resource Center, and visited the least affected areas and the average affected areas, and as well as the highly affected areas. And within that I have visited many villages of which are both relocated component and the in situ component. So with this process I've understood that the nature of the sea is also very different, because from the Coromandel coast till the Coromandel coast it is mostly of a shallow waters, and from the Park Strait onwards the nature of water is changing, and the depth when we go to the Gulf of Mannar, it is much more of a deeper waters. So it has an implication of what is shallow and what is deeper. So it has a direct implication of their fishing economy. And then I also noticed that there has been the kind of population which are existing in the fishermen societies is mostly in the northern side. Most of the Hindu dominant societies are there, and in the Nagapattinam and Karaikal area you will find most of the Muslim mixed population. And whereas in the down south, when I keep moving down near Nagarkoil, and so you'll find most of the Roman Catholic communities. So one side we have the cultural geography is very different, and the kind of societies which are located are different. I'm also looking at from the development point of it, and I have selected 3 villages. One is a Lighthouse Kuppam, which is a Dalit island of a group of 11 villages together. Here in the middle part of the Tarangambadi, which is a fishermen communities, and which is Hindu, Muslim, and the Danish people also live there. And in the south we have the Kovalam, which is on the southern tip of Tamil Nadu, which is near 5 kilometers from Kanyakumari. This is completely a Roman Catholic. So development input here, the government, the state government, the CIFs, a fisherman NGO, and here the church. So I would like to see how actually how different inputs have influenced, and how different procedures have influenced, and how people responded to these. Then I'll give you a start with a case of Kovalam, and when I went there, in fact, we couldn't even find any maps over there, nothing, there's no map, nothing. So we have actually digitized, at least I have digitized all the maps based on in that day's Google Earth impressions. And then, so you can see like, this is the old village, and you can see the center of church, right? So this is the church. You have the harbor here. I mean, they have a small fishing harbor. And what happened in the tsunami is what you see is the yellow place. Should be taken as an agents of change, how we can make and address these indigenous vulnerabilities, and how we can, how we can expand this village. And we have indigenous problems of disputes with water, disputes on sanitary issues, and joint family issues. So why not we expand? So with that mode, many communities come forward, they put some money forward, and the church have handled it to buy some land. And so this is the land which is the DC Nagar second phase and DC Nagar first phase. And then they bought again land on the Sisu Nagar, which is, so here the land is bought by the communities, and the church have facilitated through some support of NGOs, and they constructed the houses. And why they has to move, what are the challenges in moving back? Because till that point, no one have realized about the essence of coastal regulation zone. So most of the damaged houses, they are within that zone. So they decided that why not we move back? So the point when they're trying to move back is someone's agricultural land was there, someone's property was there. Obviously, there are certain negotiations on that has to taken place for the acquisition of an appropriate land. So later sometime, again, there was some revision in the coastal regulation zone where they look at these two areas, which came later, which they are supporting for 200, within the 200 meters. So they try to allocate these clusters as well. So here, this is the structure of the Kovalam and how it has drastically changed. And socially, there were 400 households before tsunami, and demographically, I mean, obviously, by demographically, there were 400, and they have been made into 1,000 households after the tsunami, because each and every joint families started distributing themselves into a nuclear family. So here what you see is a kind of traditional forms of, and where there's a joint family. There's very, they have a veranda here, and fisherman used to view his nets in the afternoon, and the kind of doors is a 4-panel door where they actually, the women, they still remain inside the house, but they can see the visitor, and it sets to maintain some privacy between the visitor and the family member. So this is how the traditional houses look like. And even the traditional clusters, they have alleyways, very narrow alleyways, and common wells where they used to come and share. And in those days, all the families used to live very close to each other. The curry which you make in this house is obviously, you have your breakfast here, you have your lunch somewhere else. It's all a very close-knit family cultures. And obviously there are certain disputes which do happen within these. So those are all there. But then in the new location, what you can see is a kind of row housing, or at least a kind of in a linear patterns. And this is what you can see from the DC Nagar new layout. So here the allocation is made by the lottery method. So they have taken the chit, number 52, you get a house, number 32. So until that point, no one knows that which house they are getting. And that is how the neighbors have been distributed in different corners. The family members have distributed in different corners. The mother and father remained in the old village, and the elder son goes to some other cluster. The younger son goes to some other cluster. And this has added a lot of, took some time for the families to adjust with the new setting, because they have to, earlier they were all dependent with each other. They are all interdependent, I can say, because someone earning low income, but still they are mutually supporting each other. For any family occasions, they were actually close, and they buy for everyone. They put the money together, and that is how. But now, being a nuclear family, they have to pay their electricity bills, they have to pay their water bills, and they have to celebrate every festivals within their home network. So obviously, it was a difficult transition. And people started building compound walls by themselves, and the kitchens which were given for a fisherman communities in a small kitchen inside a 3 cents land, it was not sufficient. So they started expanding with the kitchens, and this is how you can see all these uniform and standardized housing models. And we try to look at a kind of, I've did participated as a fisherman. I used to go like a fisherman to the sea and started taking their narratives, oral histories, and documenting all their how they were before tsunami and how they were now. And this whole process, you can see that earlier everything was near and dear. The church was near, the elderly people used to go and worship, and whereas now it is far away. It takes almost 1 hour to just travel around. And with this processes, what is happening is similarly all the religious connectivity and everything was near and dear. But now after the tsunami, it's everything is far away. So here there's some of the emotional attachments which people had, because it is not like unlike a normal person. They're not going with a briefcase and going to the sea, but they're going with a rod, fish rod, net, diesel, and they come with a catch and they come. So the woman was very much supportive. The woman helps in man in taking the food. What you see in the left hand side is the woman is waiting for the man, because they can see from their house, oh, my boat is coming and my man is coming, and they will wait for, because they come with a lot of hunger. They might go to the sea at morning 4 o'clock, they might come back at 7 or 8 or 9 sometimes. So they take the food. So their whole daily activities based on that depends on the available of fish catch. And similarly, now in the present condition, the women are not going, because now that is where they're finding some weakening of bonds. And when the people were interviewed that what kind of house do you like to have, so that is where they talk about, I want a kacha house, I mean a pakka house. Now I am living in a kacha house, so I want a pakka house. That is what exactly they have given. But now it is not suiting to their climatic needs because it's very hot. That's the kind of response they gave. And not only that, there's a little difference in the kind of tenure or ownership, because some people who owned a house before tsunami, now they have got a house given from a government land by the government, constructed by the government, where they don't have any ownership for the next 10 years. So, but where are the people who were not having house, but they still secure some money to buy a new land? Now they have got a tenure or a patta for to own their house. So the difference is sometimes the owner becomes a kind of in a temporary role, and a temporary person became a permanent role. So this kind of change in the ownership have occurred in some cases. In some cases it was just more or less the same. But what if someone wants to sell their house for a daughter's wedding or anything, obviously this ownership makes a big difference. And a person's who husband have lost their husbands in the tsunami, and how they actually can survive their livelihood. So women started expanding small shops, so which the architect have not considered the change and the dynamics in the family structures after the tsunami. So the second case which we talk about is the Tarangambadi, where you can see this is the whole layout of Tarangambadi. This is the Danish, and this is the colonial side of it, and this is the pre-colonial, which is a Muslim pre-colonial, and this whole thing is the fishermen. So the kind of network, this as you can see the colonial gateways, and you have the Masilimarinada temple which was destroyed in the tsunami, and this is how the three kind of communities live together. And one of the important note you can see is this is one of the road, Princess Street, which connects the fishermen community to the colonial community. And that is how they travel to what happened. They travel to the town center, and they travel to the ice factory, they go to the harbor, they go to the school. But in the new condition, in the new relocation, so this part of it has been relocated to as a new cluster. But now, when we started, of course, Benny Kuriakose have done extremely hard work on engaging all the people into it and developing variety of models to them. And At least he tried to make sure that the same set of neighbors are in a similar location. Then what I did was I started assessing street level analysis of how in a more of a narrative approach, how different sections of the street, how their fronts and backs are mutually communicating. And also we collected some of the mental maps where how they imagine places. Some people have drawn, but whereas in some cases I couldn't get, when I gave a pencil to them, their hands started shivering. So in this process, what I did was I gave another technique. I used a different technique where I gave a printed map of the before tsunami and the after tsunami. And here I asked them, okay, used to give a hint of this is a landmark of Renuka Devi temple. Then they said, oh, my house is here. And then I go to school. My children go to school like this. And I go to harbor, and then I go to the ice factory, and then I go to the town center. So this is the kind of moment he is able to recognize the legible image of his town or the village panchayat. But then in the new location, he is saying this is my house and my children goes to school like this. So why this map is so important, why I'm showing it, is because in many of my interviews where the pre-colonial people, they started selling their houses and they're leaving back. And then when I'm taking interviews from the elderly people, they said, we are missing our friends, we have no one around us, so we are feeling bored, and then we might leave. Then I couldn't understand why are they leaving, because they're all in the same village, they didn't go anywhere, they're not far away, they're very nearby. So then this is one thing where they used to walk in this Princess Street, which is connecting all the communities, but now the children is walking from the periphery of it. So in that way, that whole walking pattern have changed, and it brought some disconnect between these communities. So certain tools, these kind of mental map tools, will also help in understanding why there were some differences started occurring. And in Lighthouse Kuppam, there was no roadway, so I used to travel every day by boat. And there was a group of islands, it's a group of 11 villages, and this Lighthouse Kuppam is one of the important village. And so that time here, we did kind of, it was in a starting phase, so I couldn't able to, in that time, I couldn't see the response component of it, but at least I've taken some interviews of in a focus groups. As a result of it, briefly to see what the responses are, what you can see is this house where you can see that in this lottery system or in a kind of mutual agreement, fortunately these two brothers got a house adjacent to each other. So then they started building above a single thatched roof, to represent one family. And similarly, they don't have any kind of neighborhood public places, so people started encroaching the nearby spaces. And a story of a woman who lost her husband and left over with 3 children. She started making a house front in the form of a small shop and small kitchens. Now, not just so, personalization is always a natural response to these deficiencies within the culturally responsive built environments, and that is how people act upon it. And how they act upon is what they know before, and how. So now, after 8 years, I have again visited. So this was the co-dwelling concept, which the government or the agencies have promoted. So that obviously government might have some thinking that they might expand. But if you look at the kind of responses, so wherever there is a small empty space, they build a small prayer spaces. For the elder people, they put some small sand, put the net, and they used to go and sit there in the afternoon times. And you can see they build the compound also. I mean, what is this house? And see the house, they have a kind of front porch with a tiled porch. And because the church is far away in Kovalam, so they started building a small bell tower and a similar passion of the same parish church which was there in the village. And use the kind of bright colors which they use. So basically, even the kind of in 10 years, 8 years, you can see a huge vegetation that they have vegetable. So this is a kind of response. So if one has to understand about the post-disaster response, I will not say just the immediate part of it. If one looks at a very transition part, how they actually accommodated and what made them to accommodate is an important aspect. And how do the co-dwelling concept actually failed? And this is where we talk about these uniform and standardized forms often not acceptable because they also vary from family to family. Just imagine in case if the same lady who lost her husband in next to the her in-laws, at least she would have a mutual support system. Her in-laws are in some other cluster, she is in different cluster, she doesn't have any mutual support system. So the moment we are going on a uniform and standardized models, at least within that same area, one has to think about how it could be tailored further to suit her needs, and how the allocation process also could be of help. And it also, design of co-dwelling units do not sufficiently address religious and belief customs. I think there's been evidence in our previous lectures also showed you that toilets which were given as toilets, they have converted as puja rooms because of the Vastu conditions. And how their orientations, the building orientations, because a kitchen is on one side and the living room on the side and there's a balcony here. So obviously, this person has to take a food from facing the road and get into the living room, which they feel it difficult in their cultural norms. And also the usage of modern materials and steel and concrete, how actually the rusting happens in a coastal climate, and how this purpose of fronts and backs have not been well thought. And obviously in a general development issues, what we can look at it is basically one has to look at the pre and the post disaster development approaches, because they vary very much according to their geographical setup and the cultural setup. So it is difficult to address, but we have to understand one thing is the development is always a culture specific, and the building and planning guidelines does not sufficiently address the cultural needs of traditional settlements. So it is not just only because fishermen's families, the way their lifestyle is conducted is very different. So I think that is where one has to think about it. And again, when we are talking about the cluster level planning, when the neighborhood concept, how they can play, how they can meet, how they can talk. So this how a religious gathering could be conducted. So all these things. So this is where we call about inability to access local knowledge. Though Benny Kuriakose have actually addressed for its first of its kind in this region, where he talks about 2000 designs for 2000 houses. So an individual interaction which took a long time, and to tap this local knowledge one needs certain time, and one needs certain documentation, and one needs certain interpretation into the new thinking. And barriers in communicating needs and wants, what they had before and what they wanted and what they needed, there was a communication gap. And this is where we refer to Catalina Gandelson's work of communication for the development. And also the changes in land use and the ownership tenure. So finally, I summarize in the kind of this whole impacts on one side, and the causes on one side, and what we just discussed before. And this research basically discusses the reconstruction process in mainly two ways. One is in a positivist way, where the physical distances are increased and certain activities are no longer possible. So people started facing all these difficulties, and they started personalizing these spaces. And whereas development agencies operate at an instrumental level in the discussion of vulnerability. So it is also about, the discussion is about the governance, agencies, and the direct physical relationships. From the perspective of cultural anthropology, it is not, the concept of habitus is not deterministic, as the way of life is inevitably altered and different responses through the personalization process. So such cataclysmic change can also lead to increased vulnerability, because sometimes if we don't see this kind of adaptive nature, so that can result even much bigger changes. Negative impacts. So this perspective is from positivism, which draws from post-structuralism. So basically, we are looking at a social construct that operates through a physical spatial field. So what I will do is I'll just show you a small film of how these responses came from these field studies. A small film is made.
இருந்த மாதிரி அது ஒரு ரவுண்டுக்குள்ள இருந்தோம். இப்போ வந்து ஆளுக்கு ஒரு தசை. அப்போ அப்படின்னு பார்க்கும்போது அந்த முந்தி வளர்ந்த பிள்ளைகள் வந்து வளர்ந்த பாசமும் இப்போ வளர்ற பிள்ளைங்க வளர்ற பாசமும் ரொம்ப வித்தியாசப்படுது. இப்போ நான் 5 பேரும் அக்கா தங்கச்சி அண்ணன் தம்பி எல்லாம் 5 பேர் இருந்து ஒரு பிள்ளைய எப்படி பயன்படுத்துறது, ஒரு ஆள் 2 பேர் பயன்படுத்தும் போது அந்த பிள்ளைங்களோட பாசமானது ரொம்ப கம்மியாகுது. அப்போ முந்தி இருந்த பிள்ளைகள்லாம் வந்து எல்லாரையும் ஏறி அடிக்கும், அது வளர்ந்த பாசம். இப்போ இருக்கிற பிள்ளை வந்து நமக்கு ஒரு ஆள் விட்ட வர்றது கொஞ்சம் அச்சப்படுது. ஏன்? அது வளர்ற பாசம். அதனால பாசமா பாக்குறோம், ஆனா எப்பவும் கிட்ட இருக்கிறது பண்ணிடலாம். இப்ப அப்படி இல்லை, சிந்தித்து தான் செயல்படணும். நீ முந்தி அப்படி இல்லை, ஒரு ஆள் ஒரு வாயிலிருந்து ஒரு வார்த்தை தான் 4 பேர் கூடி உடனே அதுக்கு ஒரு முடிவு செயல்படுத்த முடிஞ்சது. இப்போ கஷ்டம். இப்போ அப்படி இல்லை, நாம அதை நினைச்சு இனி ஒரு கூட்டுக்குழுவுக்கு கொண்டு போய் அந்த கூட்டுக்குழு முடிவெடுத்து தான் அந்த காரியத்தை செய்யும். முன்னால வந்து இந்த பாறையில ஸ்டார் போடுவோம், பெருசா ஸ்டார் போட்டு தான் ரொம்ப ஆடம்பரமா எங்களுக்கு வந்து பெரிய நம்ம கிறிஸ்துவ மதத்துக்கு ஒரு பெரிய விழா. கிறிஸ்து பிறப்புன்னு சொல்றது வந்து ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமா மகிழ்ச்சியா கொண்டாடுற ஒரு விழா. அந்த விழா இப்ப வந்து எங்களுக்கு துக்க விழாவா இருக்கு. வந்து அந்த கிறிஸ்துமஸ் வந்து நம்ம கர்த்தர் வருகை, கிறிஸ்து வருகை வந்து எங்களுக்கு வந்து கிறிஸ்து இறப்பு மாதிரி, இந்த பெரிய வெள்ளிக்கிழமை மாதிரியே ஒரு தோற்றம் இந்த கிறிஸ்துமஸ் கொண்டு எங்களை எல்லா நேரம் வரும். ஏன்னு சொன்னா அன்றைக்கு கடற்கரையிலேயே வாழ்ந்தோம். கடற்கரை மண்ணும் அந்த தண்ணியும் அவங்களுக்கு எப்பவுமே அந்த காற்றுல கடல் சுவாசம் கிடைச்சிக்கிட்டு இருந்தது. இப்ப அப்படி இல்லை, எல்லாம் மாறி எங்கேயோ வீடு வந்து 1 கிலோமீட்டருக்கு அங்க போயிருக்கா. அவ சமயத்துக்கு ஓடி வந்து புருஷனுக்கு உதவி செய்ய முடியாது கணவனுக்கு. அதே மாதிரி அவன் பசியோட கட்டு மரத்தை விட்டு கீழே இறங்குறான்னு சொன்னா உடனே வந்து உணவு கொடுக்க முடியாது. ஏன்? அவன் ஒரு வாரது தெரியாது. முதல்ல நாம எப்போ கரைக்கு வரமுன்னு எப்படி இருக்குது.
They feel very bored since they were interacting with them, they sharing their burdens and everything. No, since they left, they don't feel comfortable here. They long for their company.
வீடக நெருங்கியிருந்த பிறகு பிரச்சனைகள் அதிகம். இப்போ எல்லா வீடும் பக்கமா போனோம்னா பிரச்சனைகள் குறைவு. அதனால அமைதியான இடம் இப்ப இருக்கிறது தான் அமைதி. இதுதான் நிம்மதியான இடம்.
தள்ளி இருக்குதுங்கிற
இது ஊரோட மக்களோட சேர்ந்து அது காட்டு பக்கம், அது தள்ளி காட்டு பக்கம் இருக்குதான்.
அதாவது கடல்ல இருந்து பயம் இல்ல.
வேற வீட்டுல டாய்லெட்டு எல்லாம்
நெய்பர்ஸ்,
கிச்சன், ஸ்மால் கிச்சன்
operate
that place is
okay,
that place is near
50% கேரண்டி. நல்ல உப்பு காற்று இல்லாத இடத்துக்கு. இந்த உப்பு காற்று இருக்கிற இடத்துக்கு வந்து RCC வந்து 10 வருஷத்துல கிராக் ஆயிரும். 10 வருஷம் தான் இதுக்கெல்லாம் கேரண்டி. ஆனா வாட்டு வீடுனாக்கி RCC கம்பி யூஸ் பண்ணாம பண்ணும்போது, கம்பி யூஸ் பண்ணாம வாட்டு வீடு கட்டி கம்பி ஸ்டீல் யூஸ் பண்ணாம நம்ம வீடு கட்டணும்னாக்கி அது ஒரு 50 வருஷம் கேரண்டி.
காற்று வரும், நல்ல கூலிங் இருக்கும், பரமாத்தத்துக்கு நல்ல ஏரியா,
நல்ல வீடு, அந்த
நல்ல வீடு, அமைதியான வீடு. இது வந்து ஹீட்டா இருக்கும். நம்ம எப்பவும் ஃபேன் போட்டாலும் ஃபேன் ஹீட் வேற, நம்ம வெப்பம் காற்று வந்தாலும் வெளியில போகாது, போனாலும் ஹீட்டா தான் இருக்கும். அது அப்படி இல்லை, அது அந்த பக்கம் இந்த பக்கம் அந்த ஓடு வந்து ஹீட்டு கம்மியாகும்.
நாங்க சுனாமில பாதிக்கப்பட்டவங்க எல்லாரும் ஒண்ணா இருக்கோம். நாங்க சந்தோஷம் கொண்டாட, பிள்ளைகள் எல்லாம் சந்தோஷம் கொண்டாடுறோம்.
அதாவது இங்க இருக்கிற பொதுமக்கள் எல்லாம் கலந்து ஆலோசனை பண்ணி இன்னாருக்கு என்ன இடம், இன்னாருக்கு என்ன இடம், ஏன்னாக்கா நாங்களுக்கு கடற்கரை
ஏன் வாங்கி தரீங்கன்னு தெரியுமா? முன்னாடி வராண்டால வந்துட்டு தலை ஒட்டி கொடுக்குறோம்ல, அந்த தளத்துக்கு வந்துட்டு நீங்க வந்துட்டு காசு அதிகமாகும். அந்த காசை காம்பன்சேட் பண்றதுக்கு நீங்க ஒரு கதவும் ஜன்னலும் வாங்கி தர மாதிரி இருக்கும். அது வாசக்கால இருந்துச்சுன்னா வேற வீடு இதுவா?
இதே ஷார்ட், இதே இடத்துல வந்து இங்கே வந்துடுவாங்க, இந்த மெயின் ரோடு. இது
நல்லா இருக்கு சார். இப்போ மாமா இறந்த பிறகு இப்போ தனியா இருக்கிறேன்ல, தனியா பிள்ளைங்களை வச்சுக்கிட்டு ஒரு கடை வச்சு சார் பண்ண சொல்றேன். அது குடும்பத்தோட இது சரி சந்தோஷம். இப்போ அவங்க எல்லாரும் கஷ்டம் தான் இருக்கு, இருந்தாலும் கடை வச்சுக்கிட்டு நாலு ஜனங்களும் பார்த்துக்கிட்டு போயிட்டு குடும்பத்தோட இருக்கிறது சரி சார்.
ஒரு தண்ணி பைப்பும் போடல, ஒரு எந்த இதுவுமே இந்த பக்கம் இல்ல. ஆனா அங்க இருந்தது எல்லாமே எங்க தெருவுல இருந்தது. ஆனா இந்த பக்கம் வந்த பிறகு எதுவுமே இல்ல, பைப்பே இல்லம்மா. பைப்பு அங்க 60 வீட்டுக்கு ஒரு பைப் போட்டிருக்காங்க. அது எப்படின்னா தண்ணியே கிடைக்க மாட்டேங்குது.
அந்த சித்தோட மேல ஒரே வெயில்லாம் இனிமேல் நீங்க இருக்க முடியாது. வெயில தான் காத்துல தான் உட்காந்து கடலுக்கு பொறுத்து
தூரம் தான்.
இங்க இருந்து 1 கிலோமீட்டர் இருக்குது எங்களுக்கு. என்ன பார்க்க மீன் தொழில் பாக்குறவங்களுக்கு பக்கத்துல இருந்தா தானே கஷ்டம் இல்லாம இருக்கும்.
ஆமா.
இவ்வளவு வசதி இருந்தாக்கா இழுத்து கட்டிக்கலாம். கொஞ்சம் பின்னாடி 15 அடி இருக்குது.
ஓகே.
இது 10 அடி, பின்னாடி 15 அடி. கிளியரா இருக்குது இல்ல, ரோடு கிளியரா இருக்கு, நீட்டா சைடா இருக்கு. அங்கனாக்க சந்து பொந்தா போகணும். இது
சைடுனால ஏற்பட்ட ஒரு சூழ்நிலையோ அல்லது என்னவோ என்னன்னு தெரியல. அது கடல் வளையத்துடைய ஒரு ஆராய்ச்சி பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் தான் நமக்கு வந்து தெரிஞ்சுக்க முடியும். ஆனா இப்போதைக்குள்ள சூழ்நிலைங்கன்னா மீன் கிடைக்கிறதும் கம்மி. அதுக்கு முன்னாடி துடுப்பு போட்டுட்டு போகும்போதெல்லாம் கிட்டத்தட்ட மீன் கிடைக்கும்.
இங்க வந்து 1/4 மணி நேரத்துல கடலுக்கு போயிடும்.
தொழிலுக்கு போயிடலாம்.
அங்க இருந்து வரதுன்னா ஒரு 1/2 மணி நேரம்.
ஒரு மெடிக்கல் போகும்போது ஹாஸ்பிட்டல் கொஞ்சம் தூரமா போகணும் ஒண்ணு. அடுத்தபடியா ரோடு போக்குவரத்து இல்ல, இதுக்கு மேல போட்டு கொடுப்பாங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். அதே நேரத்துல இப்ப நாங்க போயிட்டு நாங்க எங்க இருந்தாலும் ஒன்னாதான் சார் இருப்போம். நாங்க பிரிஞ்சே இருக்க வந்து ஒரு சரித்திரமே கிடையாது. நாங்க ஒன்னாதான் இருப்போம். இப்போ
எங்க இருக்கா அது
தூரமோ கிட்டக்கையோ அதை பத்தி பிரச்சனை இல்ல. நாங்க எல்லாம் ஒன்னாதான் இருப்போம்.
இருக்க முடியாதா?
இருக்க முடியாது. பயம் கடல் இங்க வரும், பயந்து ஓடி போடும். முழுவி எல்லாம் முழுவி இந்த ஓடுக்குள்ள.
ஏது நல்லா இருக்கு.
நம்மளுக்கு வந்து காத்து போறது இதுதான் நல்லா இருக்கும். நம்மளுக்கு கடை
இது நல்லா இருக்குதா?
கடல்ல பிழைக்கிற நம்ம தானே, கடல்ல பிழைக்கிற நம்ம. ஒரு மரமட்டை இல்ல.
So I think you have seen now the responses of it, and so there's a very variety of responses. On one side, people started liking it, and some other side they are not disliking it because of various cultural reasons and their livelihood aspects and the change in the way the cultural setups have. So that is where we look at the urban design concepts, how they can be operated both levels. One is how the layout can be viewed instrumentally and functionally, and in terms of the way it supports or not issues of income and livelihood. And then it can be interpreted as a socio-spatial construct, how people started working on these performances. So I think this brings back to the Leach's ideas of how the narrativism, performatives and mirroring, and it also directs various methods how we can investigate culture. So there are a few recommendations which we made on empowering, how we can empower and how we can develop appropriate training and documentations as well. So basically these are some of my references which are well cited, and so thank you very much.